Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you today?
Good morning, Frank. I'm well, thank you, and I hope you are too.
Thank you.
Today's Bastille Day, and so it's difficult not to think of revolutions. And of course, the French Revolution is the textbook version of revolutions. Everybody forgets about the English Revolution that happened a century earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But this season of revolutions began in the 17th century and continued for a while, and that completely reorganized the world as we know it. And one wonders why it should have happened then. And I was thinking about this, and I think it's probably caused by the same factors that have been causing social change in the modern world. That is population growth. Population was beginning to grow faster then. And of course, even though the revolutions were, the purpose of the revolutions was for the lower classes to reorganize society so that they would be have a more equal role in the way society worked. And it took a long time to work. Some people would say it still hasn't worked. And of course, still we now have the Gilets jaunes in Paris, and I think in other parts of France as well. And there's still a lot of dissatisfaction with the way society works, even in the most democratic countries. But thinking about this because of Bastille Day, it occurred to me that we've been talking about the crucial phase of the process of globalization and the problem of organization as globalization progresses. And it occurred to me that, in fact, everything that we wanted to change, starting in the 17th century, had to do with a form of society which in itself has changed. So to begin with, when human beings began to form societies some 300 or 400,000 years ago, there was no argument about the fact. It was taken for granted, and it just happened naturally, that there was a division of labor between men and women. And there were senior people who had more authority and leadership potential than junior people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is ceasing to be true. To start with, starting in the middle of the last century, the division of labor between male and female began to fade away. And now gender is becoming irrelevant to anything that has to do with organization, because you can even choose what gender you want to be.
Right.
Seniority, I can talk about this because I'm a senior.
You have license.
In the full, that is in the sense that the term is still often used. There are more and more of us than there used to be. We're a much larger part of the population, and I meant to check actually what the current average age of populations is, but it's certainly climbed a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
And people are living much longer, and they're living much more active lives into a much more advanced age. And the way that they're, partly for this reason, one assumes, the way that their actual seniority doesn't count for as much as it used to. So we've got a new problem on our hands that has to do with the organization of everyday social life in the later stages of globalization, in that human beings relate to each other in very different ways, from the way they related to each other when the age of revolutions began some 300 or 400 years ago.
Well, let me just observe something, right? Thank goodness we do relate to each other differently than we did hundreds of years ago. Because I think back, of course, to the English Revolution in 1789 when the French Revolution occurred, then the American Revolution, and then only 60 years later in the 1840s, those revolutions through Europe. As people rose up and expressed dissatisfaction with the institutions. And all we do, you and I, in these talks, is talk about dissatisfaction with institutions because of the acceleration of globalization. Now, we've not seen a reaction like violent upheaval and revolution. We don't see that. The most we see are snarky playing out of attitudinal chest beating on social media platforms accompanied with votes at the polling place. So maybe even though the relational attitudes of people toward each other is changing so much, maybe also being confined as well is the range of actions and activities that people would ever think about taking in response to problems that they see. Am I making any sense? I think what I'm thinking of is these people who claim to have causes and are upset and are angry. It seems as if the recourse of actions that they have within their own mind available to them are not as inclusive as decapitating the king or taking cobblestones up and hurling them at the White House. I mean, the most they're going to do is express dissatisfaction on Facebook or something like that.
Well, certainly kings have a different reputation today than they used to, and actually a senior faculty member of the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania recently wrote a paper on royalty, arguing that, in fact, countries that still have monarchies are much better organized.
Yeah.
They have a symbolic sense of unity.
I don't disagree with that.
And countries that don't have them. You saw that?
I don't disagree with that.
So everything about the way we think about political organization, I think, is changing and has changed. And the other thing, of course, that needs to be taken into account in arguments of this type is the fact that religion used to be so important in the organization of society. And the Reformation was the first revolution, which led to a century of wars, which all were in fact political wars. Now religion has a much less significant role in the way any society is organized than was the case back then.
Mm-hmm.
So this makes one wonder what sort of society we're becoming.
Well, I do think, as I'm reflecting on this a little bit, I think that I think the responses that society has these days to implement change are very milquetoastish compared to storming the Bastille or standing in the village green at Lexington or Concord or riding with Cromwell through the countryside. I think that I think in some ways we've been desensitized by the increasing level of interactivity between us, and we're willing to take symbolic virtual steps of disagreement to register our disagreement. But the idea of actually doing something and putting yourself in harm's way and perhaps risking the sacrifice of your life, this is anathema to people. It's not there any longer.
But the system that we gradually developed of nation states with democratic governments based on party membership has recently been getting into very difficult situations. So at the moment we have the two-party system in the US and the UK in particular, where the parties are divided,
Mm-hmm.
and the system just doesn't seem to be working as well as it used to. We're expecting in a couple of weeks to get a new prime minister in England, and the candidates are certainly not ideal candidates, and so it's not clear what in fact is going to be the reaction when that result is declared. And there are similar, well, not similar, it was similar in some way, but there are other problems with party-based democracy in the European countries, especially France and Italy.
Well, what is the general population actually going to do about it? Or is it just going to be a continuing evolvement of people of the governments going one way and the population going another way, and they're becoming increasingly distant from each other? I mean, how long can the institution survive that way?
I think it's probably going to be an era of inefficient government, and just exactly what that might spawn is very difficult to foresee. Mm-hmm. But one wonders whether the nation state is going to continue to be the generally accepted, globally accepted form of organization, since after all it was imposed on the larger, most of the world by the people who invented the idea, and it's not working very well anywhere.
No, it certainly isn't.
And we're talking now about a global community, and we have absolutely no idea how to organize a global community. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, there are no movements to experimenting in different ways to develop some sort of global organization.
No, I think any thought in that direction is going to be on hold until the Brexit situation is resolved and the American political leadership situation is taken care of, and then after that it'll be something else that'll continue to delay thinking about this. So it may well be, as you suggested, that what's going to happen is that these governments are going to become increasingly more inefficient, and where that's going to lead is anybody's guess. So I don't know the answer either.
I'm glad you brought up Brexit, because that's a very interesting example of rebellion to go back to the past, which is not working, and it's completely unclear how this is going to be resolved. Nobody seems to have any ideas how to resolve it on either side.
Well, it's rebellion at the ballot box. I mean, it was not rebellion of sacking the EU's offices in London. I mean, I guess in one way it's progress that people are limited to nonviolent activities. But at the same token, it just strikes me that it's a little bit of a impotent kind of response to these things.
Well, especially since the division and the result of the referendum was roughly half on each side.
Right.
And nobody said anything about that.
No.
So maybe we should divide into two states. That's what the Scots want to do anyway.
That's right. Well, it may not be a bad idea in this country either, since, I mean, Trump did not win the plurality of the vote.
The South and the North, yes.
We could have a coastal, it'll be like East Pakistan and West Pakistan back in the old days. All right. Well, Professor Spooner, thank you very much. I'll look forward to meeting you in person this week, and we'll continue this discussion then and also next weekend. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.